Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cuny and Peter G. Peterson Fund, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and this is another of an occasional series of broadcast conversations prepared in cooperation with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation on the subject of Americans working longer and our nation perhaps doing better as a result. Joining me again today in pursuing this theme of such profound social and personal significance to so many of us is the RAND Corporation's Dr. Nicole Maestas, whose work focuses on the economics of retirement, health, and disability, specifically on how longer work lives could ameliorate the economic effects of population aging. Now, 2 years ago, in addressing the Committee on Finance of the United States Senate on encouraging work at older ages, my guest said, quote, "The economic challenges posed by an aging society are significant. As the baby boomers age and retire, the ratio of non-workers to workers in the population is rising, causing society's consumption needs to outpace growth in our productive capacity, and ultimately straining Social Security and Medicare and slowing economic growth." We started our conversation from that point last time. Let's do it again today. And I would ask you, Dr. Maestas, whether other nations, developing nations, are facing the same kind of problems and the same kind of opportunities that we discussed last time.
The same kinds of problems are seen in other developed countries. So Europe, for example, faces, in fact, in many ways, if you contrast the position of the US with the position of many European countries, the US actually looks pretty good. Why? Well, already we have much higher rates of employment among older workers in the US than are currently seen in many European countries. And looking at the population changes that are coming down the pike, it's actually worse in Europe than it is in the US. In other words, one statistic is the fraction of population older than age 65, the growth in that population between, say, now and 10, 20, 30 years from now. More growth in the population, in the older population in European countries than we will see here in the US. So, in other words, the problem is more severe in many European countries, and yet they're even worse positioned to be able to deal with it, only because nobody works past retirement in many European countries.
That's interesting. So you're talking about a psychological divide there.
Yeah, I think there is a psychological divide, but it's also very interesting. Before we were talking about the institutions, public policies. Are the policies and institutions set up to match these demographic changes and these changes in the way people want to retire? And the answer for the US was, of course, well, yes and no. And we've actually, we've made some progress, and I expect we'll make more progress on this front. Well, you look at Europe, And the answer really is no. Now, it's not like no one is seeing this as a problem, but the institutional setting in many countries really it's very strongly toward work until retirement and then leave the labor force. There is not a lot of part-time work. There's not a lot of unretirement. People are beginning to get interested in it. I'm starting to get calls from, I had a call recently from the European Commission. They want to talk about unretirement. But changes have to be made in many of the the social programs that people use to transition out of the labor force. For example, in many countries it's very easy to retire via the disability insurance program or via an unemployment insurance program, not just the traditional retirement program. And we think of many of these programs in these countries as really kind of, we call them alternative routes to retirement. Not, in other words, they're being used as a way to exit the labor force permanently, more so than they're being used for their stated purpose. And this is playing out, this is the European situation. It's really quite contrasting compared to the U.S. situation.
How do you explain this? National attitudes.
Yeah, I don't know. National attitudes, sure. Social policies around leave from employment are more generous. Maternity leave, year-long maternity leave benefits in some countries comes to mind. But population aging is really a game changer, and it impacts the fiscal position of countries in very profound ways. I mean, it cuts to the heart of economic growth. The quote that you opened the program with really, illustrates the problem. It's when the consumption needs of a society are growing much, much faster than the society's ability to produce the goods and services to feed the society, right? Economic growth slows necessarily.
You say the society's ability. I think what you have been saying, though,
Yeah.
society's population's willingness. We're willing to work, from what you said. You talk about unretirement.
Yeah.
And you say it doesn't happen that often elsewhere.
Right.
Again, what do you think it means?
Well, I mean, unretirement is, here's what I think is, here's the thing. I think, there has been unretirement. It has been around for a long time. There have always been people who have retired and returned to work. But we're now seeing more and more and more of it. And at the same time, people are living longer, they're living healthier. The desire on the part of older workers, I believe, is there. Many older workers would like to keep working.
And you've already said this isn't a matter, essentially, of financial pressure.
It's, now the Great Recession has come upon us and has increased financial pressure on many households. So I don't mean to minimize the impact of the Great Recession, but these are forces that were at play long before the Great Recession, and people like being productive. They like engaging in activities that they see value in. They like being valued. The workplace is a place of social connections. People derive their sense of identity often from their work. I believe that there is, and we see this in nationally representative data. You see this particularly in the U.S. You see that people intend to work after retirement. They tend to delay their retirements. They tend to, they want to partially retire. So I see, on the one hand, these very stark demographic pressures that raise the specter of declining economic or slowing economic growth in the long run, yet the solution is right there as well, with a population of older workers that actually would like to keep working.
You're saying you don't have to coerce us
Right.
into doing the right thing.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
A plus.
It's a plus, yeah. And so certainly, you know, my sense is that in the European setting, some of those same forces are at play. And in fact, if, you know, we spoke earlier about the great turnaround in the long-running decline in employment at older ages. Well, that same remarkable turnaround in the mid-90s also played out in European countries as well. So the same forces that are increasing the desire and willingness of older individuals to work past traditional retirement ages are present there as well.
But you're saying not as profoundly. I
Well,
thought you were
in
saying,
that case, I would argue that the institutional constraints are much more rigid.
I see what
So you can see it playing out in the data, but the institutions are really, you know, much more. We've made a lot more progress in this country around adjusting the institutions to accommodate these trends. So one example of that would be, you know, the increases in the full retirement age that have been steadily phasing in. Well, those were announced back in the 1980s. Many European countries are now, only now, or in recent years, adjusting their full retirement ages. So some of these institutional changes are being, the need for them is being recognized, but they're being implemented with pretty significant lag over when we've started some of this here.
The AARP, is it aware of your findings? Because in a sense it seems so much to be protesting the notion of extending the retirement age. As a representative of America's workers, older workers presumably.
Well, you know, I don't know about that. You know, I will say that when I want some inspiration around what employers are devising in the way of creative strategies to keep older workers engaged and employed, you know, I turn to AARP's website for, you know, the annual awards they give in recognition of employers' attempts to do this kind of thing.
Is it then we will push for employers devising plans and strategies to help us get back, help us unretire, but at the same time fight to the last man or woman, aged or otherwise, against extending the Social Security age?
Right.
It's a contradiction, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's you know, I'm not really you know in a position to comment on their position, but I'm fairly confident that, well, for one, the full retirement age is increasing already. It hasn't even fully phased in yet. So full retirement age today is 66, but it will eventually be at 67.
But we're
I would
talking
be
about-
willing
yeah.
to bet that we will see further increases in both the full retirement age and also in the early retirement age, which is still at 62, as you know. So
with penalties.
well, you take a penalty for claiming early with
Right.
respect to the full benefit that you would get. That's right.
Right. Have your researchers ever touched upon, or has RAND's researchers ever touched upon, a most desirable age for full retirement? Desirable in terms of the economy?
Oh, I see. Well, that's an interesting question, an interesting thought. You know, I guess we'd have to think some about, you know, on what dimension would we consider it desirable. And I would argue that what often is most desirable, certainly from an economic efficiency point of view, is to have as few constraints as possible on the ability of somebody to retire when it's personally optimal for them. So in other words, the more choice there is and the fewer institutional public policy, employer constraints around when people choose to exit the labor force and how they choose to come back into the labor force if they wish to. The fewer constraints there are upon that behavior, the better off we all are. And I really do think the story is a story of a great diversity of paths. People they traverse, the labor force, their career building years in very different ways, and they leave the labor force in very, very different ways as well. And, any notion of kind of a one-size-fits-all retirement transition, which kind of was much more the way it was in the past, we're basically seeing that breaking down in favor of many more, varied and varied transitions out of the labor force.
That makes me think, I suppose, as a fuddy-duddy college professor, but it makes me think of the connection with educational philosophies and the conflict among them. For instance, increasingly, we seem to be moving away from the older liberal arts education, which basically on the college level saying, we'll prepare you for anything in the future. And we're talking now about living a lot longer.
Yeah.
And this wonderful phrase of unretirement, moving on to other things, which that seems to be to a great extent.
Yeah.
And I would think it would impact upon our thinking about educational philosophy.
Yeah. I think you're right, it has to impact that. You do see evidence of it's hard to say it's all new. This is, to a certain degree, right, some of this has been going on, for a very long time, but more and more there is an emphasis on creating opportunities for education, retraining, retooling outside of the traditional liberal arts education. And in fact, as our economy becomes more dynamic, people don't stay in the same job forever now. They change jobs, they change industries. The education system has to, and I know of particular instances where it is actually delivering opportunities for continuing education, for retraining, retooling, and the like. But it does become more and more important that those opportunities be available, because part of what you can do when you unretire is you now have some retirement income. You don't have to work. You can actually go back to school. You can obtain training in that thing that you always wanted to do, or some new thing that you think sounds exciting, right?
Now, let me ask you a question. Are you talking about a specific, and it's a question that sort of bothered me in this program and the one we did previously. Are you talking about a certain cadre of Americans? Are you talking about a certain level of being well off, having Social Security and perhaps private money, pension?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about a further dichotomizing society?
Yeah. It's hard to say where we will wind up. But what we have seen so far is that, yes, unretirement rates are higher among the more educated. That was, in some ways, a surprise to me, because when I set out to look at this, I thought, just as everybody else who read the newspapers thought, that unretirement was a symptom of economic distress. But by and large, that's not the case. And
is it higher education and higher bucks, wealthier persons?
Yeah.
Those two things usually go together?
And health usually goes with that as well.
Good health.
Good health, right? Yeah, there's a very strong correlation between higher education, higher income, and better health. You know, I mean, health really is the kind of the big question here. Will our health keep up with us, right? We're living longer on average, we're living healthier. We should be able to work longer, but not everybody will.
So we're back to those who have will gain more because they do take care of their health better. They are better educated. They do have more dollars in the banks.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't that scare you sometimes, what you see in the long, long future?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's not as if, I guess I'd make one distinction here. So it's not as if somebody who is less educated and has lower income and less retirement wealth would be somehow precluded from unretiring, per se,
They
right?
won't have as much opportunity.
Well, we are not talking about, we really aren't talking about, though, high-level jobs,
Okay.
right? We're talking often about service industry jobs, retail, trade, support types of positions. So, maybe, there's certainly some possibility that they might not be as competitive in the labor market for those positions as somebody who, brings a higher level of skill from their past career. But, but that is there. That is certainly there. It's not like, I think we'd be overstating the case to say that the unretirement route is closed off for them. Now, but the real concern really is health. Will their health support a longer work life? Now, health concerns all of us. It's not, again, we don't want to draw I don't want to draw too polarized a picture here, because, plenty of higher, of well-educated people suffer severe health problems. It seems to be just the nature of aging. But yeah.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, recently too.
You talked about service field.
Yeah.
Is that the one that grows the most in terms of the unretirement?
Yeah. So it's very quite interesting. You see a very distinct movement of people out of, say, the manufacturing industry, or out of professional managerial occupations.
So much stress?
Into service industries and more professional support, administrative positions. Yeah. So I do think, the service industry is, one place where we do tend to find a lot of these sorts of jobs. It won't be the only place, though.
When Jessie Grumman was here, I think you possibly saw us taping the program. She was talking about nurses, as you have talked about nurses, and she was talking about all of us needing someone to lead us through and sit with us when we're in the hospital as guides. Are you finding that in the health area and in the teaching area, in the do-good fields, that unretiring people are moving in those directions?
Well, I can't speak specifically to that exact case from the data. However, it is an obvious great position or class of positions for people who want to re-enter the labor force. It's an area where there's tremendous need. There's a shortage of, we talked about the nursing shortages, so there's a shortage of labor, but there's an increasing awareness, I guess, and Jessie spoke to this, of how complex our medical care system is. Many people do need help navigating the system, and this is a great example of an opportunity that older workers could kind of fill.
Ironically, if I understand the situation correctly, that was one of the reasons that there are many of us who thought that there would not be movement back into the workforce because we were going to have to stay home and take care of our elderly parents and our younger children.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's. I mean, that's a big concern. So we've talked about how the desire seems to be there. Employers seem to be coming along and creating opportunities. All of it is lining up just as one would hope. Yet, health, will our health hold up? That's an open question. And caregiving responsibilities are another open question.
Not being paid for giving the care, but caring for our families.
Caring for our families. That's right. That's right.
That's such an interesting conflict there.
Yeah, yeah.
We need the bucks to go into our economy by paying for these services.
Yeah.
And yet people aren't availing themselves of those opportunities because they have to take care of their own.
Because that's right. Right. That's exactly right.
And yet you seem wonderfully optimistic about the long-range tendencies.
Yeah. I am optimistic. I am, and yes, I mean, it's the way I see it is the forces that are at play here are really strong. Like, these are not just little wavering trends that might, turn around and take us back the other direction. And sure, there are challenges along the way, and the way in which we, adapt to those challenges. If we adapt well, we'll see even more employment at older ages. If we don't adapt so well, then it won't be quite as rosy as we're hoping. But my view is that this is where we're headed, and it's just a matter of degree.
I'll take that view. It's a very positive one. And Nicole Maestas, thank you again for joining me on The Open Mind.
Thank you.
And thanks too to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck. And do visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cuny and Peter G. Peterson Fund, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.